Hello there, today I'm going to teach you guys how to mix skin tones using primary yellow, cadmium red, ultramarine blue, burnt umber and white. We're going to mix these three primary colours together to create a base for our skin tone mixes and fill out this chart. I'm going to start with some primary yellow, pull that off to one side. Give my brush a good rinse out. And then pull up some cadmium red. Mix that into the yellow, which will give me a nice kind of orange tone. A common misconception is that you should mix these three primary colours up in equal amounts. It's not strictly true. You want it to be a balanced mix of the three, rather than an even mix of the three. So what I mean by that is you want to mix up a neutral brown that's not too red, not too yellow, not too blue. If any one of those colours becomes dominant in the mix, you'll be able to tell. You'll get a kind of an olivey colour if there's too much yellow. You'll get a very reddy brown if there's too much red, or it'll start going grey if there's too much blue in there overall. So it's not that you need, a third of each colour. You just need a balanced mix of the three colours to create a neutral that's going to serve as our base for the rest of our skin tones. Just adding a little bit more yellow here. Go ahead and pull some of this ultramarine blue down here, and I start off with probably a little bit less than I need, because you can always add more, but it's always easier to add a little bit in gradually rather than go in a little bit heavy-handed and mix too much in straight off the bat and end up with a complete imbalance in your mix. Just rinsing my brush out again. Just adjust this a little bit more ultramarine blue, and then I'm just going to pull some of this neutral mix off to one side, and a little bit more blue into this one. So now I'm just going to start filling in my chart. I've made this putting a crisscross grid of masking tape down. So the first square I'm just going to show the mix that I've used. So a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red, and a little bit of the ultramarine blue. Okay, so this is my initial mix to make my neutral base. I'm going to take some of that neutral base and fill in the next square. Now what I'm going to do with this neutral base is just add a touch of white in there. I'm just going to add a little bit more white in each time to tint my skin tone base, and I'm going to gradually lighten it with white. White has an unexpected side effect of actually cooling down the skin tones as well. white not only lightens it, tints it, makes it more of a pastel variation, but it also cools it. So I'm just going through, just adjusting my base each time with a little bit more white in the mix. So if you have your kind of darker black skin tones, you're going to be obviously using things higher up the spectrum. If you're painting Caucasian skin tones, you're going to be shifting down with more and more white added in. You know, but all skin tones, no matter the complexion or ethnicity, essentially come from the same base mix. Just adding a bit more white in there. Now, we have preconceived notions about skin tones and what colour skin should be. I asked a student recently, what colour is a skin tone? And they went to answer and caught it just before it went out of their mouth, and looked around the room, all of the different complexions and all the faces around them, and realised it depends. It depends on lifestyle, depends on ethnicity, depends on the lighting situation in the room, whether in natural light, artificial light, coloured light. You know, you could go on and on and on and on. You know, and you can adjust these skin tones with any colour if you wanted to push something into a vivid electric blue light. You know, there's ways of adjusting your colour with that, but I'm just kind of talking about a neutral lighting situation. So here's my first row filled in. You can see that I can kind of create a range of skin tones just by adding more and more white gradually. I'm going to jump down to the second row here, and we're going to start off with that initial neutral base mix again, the neutral mix that I mixed up using the yellow, the red and the ultramarine blue. So I'm going to scoop some of that off to one side again. And for this row, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an imbalance in the mix. I'm going to add more red to this, so I'm going to create some skin tones that are a little more ruddy, a little redder, a little warmer. I'll take a little bit of the cad red and mix that into my base. Just going to indicate the colour mix in this first square, my base neutral plus red. And then I'm just going to do the same thing again, tint with white, just adding a touch in at a time, adjusting it by about 10% each time if you want to break it down that way. And then just filling my square. Adding another little bit of white and filling in the next one. And there are going to be many of these skin tones that kind of might not suit the lighting setup that you have or the subject that you're painting, but you know, by going through this exercise it will help you gain confidence with mixing skin tones and mixing them quickly on the fly. If you're painting alla prima, mixing colours up on the fly, mixing your colours wet in wet, you know, this is an invaluable skill set to have. This is a invaluable knowledge for portraiture, and it will just speed you up. I always say to my students, if you you want to really wrap your head around colour theory, one of the best things you can do is make one of these charts and just say, okay, what can we do with one colour today? What can we do with green? And you would take that green and add yellow in and create a row. You would create a row and add more blue into it gradually, shift it into the blue-green part of the colour spectrum. You could mix up greens using the various blues and yellows you have available to you. So cyan blue, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, phthalo blue. You could use cadmium yellow, lemon yellow, yellow ochre. Mix all of those up in various different degrees to see what kind of greens you can create. You could take red and gradually desaturate green because they're opposite colours. You could tint any number of those with white. You could tone any number of them with black. The sky really is the limit in terms of kind of the amount of variation you can create with a very limited colour palette. But doing this exercise and familiarising yourself with the variables, how to adjust your colour, looking at the temperature of the colour, the value of the colour, the saturation or vibrancy of the colour is key. So I'm mixing up my third row now, and this time I'm going to be using my neutral base but adding more yellow into the mix overall. So you can see my first swatch, a little more yellow than the two above it. I'm just going to take a little bit of my neutral mix and just create a little key here for what I'm adding in. Neutral, plus more yellow. I'm going to take my mix and start adding white to it, a little bit at a time. Tint it so you can create some more ochre-y skin tones. Just reducing this down with white each time. You can see it's lightening it. It's also cooling it down as well gradually. It's taking some of that warmth out of the mix. It's going to be good for desaturated areas like the forehead, or the area just above your top lip is quite desaturated as well. When we're talking about desaturation, we're really talking about taking the vibrancy out of the colour, just muting it down a little bit. The language around colour theory can get quite stodgy sometimes. You have saturation, vibrancy, intensity, chroma, which all essentially refer to the vibrancy of the colour, saturation of the colour. It's bonkers. Also, especially when you're working with something like watercolour and you might be referring to how saturated the paper is with water. You see how people get easily confused. Okay, so that's my row with neutral plus extra yellow plus white. For this next row, you guessed it, we're going to be taking that neutral base and adding a little extra ultramarine blue into it, and this will give us quite a desaturated, kind of dark, cool skin tone, which would be good for areas that are falling into shadow, the sockets around the eyes, maybe the underneath of the nose if that is falling into shadow. Unless you're working with very specific, deliberate lighting conditions, if you think we're usually lit from above, by ceiling lights or by the sun, so not to generalize too much, but a lot of shadows generally tend to fall in specific places, hollows or places that escape that light source. So I'm going to fill my key in again with my neutral mix and a dash of ultramarine blue. You see this makes the mix much cooler overall, almost shifts it towards a grey. Got my key. Let's just have the ultramarine blue on there. Neutral plus ultramarine blue. And we're going to start tinting with white. Look at how desaturated this is compared to the two above it. That ultramarine blue is quite a desaturated blue at the best of times, so it really does kind of knock a lot of the vibrancy out straight off the bat. So I'm just going to tint with white and reduce that down each time. And sometimes when you're doing these charts and you're working your way through this exercise, you'll look at two that you've put next to each other and you'll think, I'm not seeing a huge amount of contrast there between them. Let's just add a little bit more, or go over it again, just reduce it down so you see more of a shift between each square of the grid. That's absolutely fine. It's the nice thing about acrylics is you can always paint over. Which I'm going to do here. Okay, next row, going to do something a little bit different here. We've added one more of each colour, primary colour, into the neutral mix in the 3 rows above. In the following 3 rows, what we're going to do is we're going to start with our neutral mix, but add more of 2 of the primary colours. So we're going to shift the imbalance in a different way. So for this first one, I'm going to start with my neutral mix, and I'm going to add more primary yellow and more cadmium red. So this should kind of shift the skin tones more towards an orangey kind of warm skin tone mix, with less blue in here overall. Starting off with my neutral in the key, and it looks a bit messy at the moment. Once I take this tape off, I have a nice clean grid which I can use for reference. I'll show you that at the end of the video. Just mixing up a bit more of my neutral mix as I've run out. Here's my first swatch with a little bit of extra primary yellow and cadmium red. Just fill my key in, so I've got that as a reference. Extra yellow, extra red. Now I'm just tinting with white and adding a little bit more each time. I don't really kind of have a rule in terms of how much I'm adding in. You could say it's 10%, you could say it's, I don't know, 1/8. It's really just kind of just enough to see a perceptible shift. It doesn't have to be too precise. As long as you're seeing a little bit of contrast between each mix, that's absolutely fine. And this chart here really is just a tip of the iceberg. You know, you could go even further, you know, mute these colours down even more with white. You could adjust them in different ways. You could, you know, you could take any one of these squares and adjust it in a bunch of different ways. So don't feel like this is the this is it. You know, there's always more skin tones to discover. Apparently the human eye is capable of perceiving and distinguishing between 2.4 million different colours. So I never really worry about getting the colour exactly as I see it, because that is just going to lead to frustration and madness. What I try to do is look at the relationship between the colour and the colours around it. This is more desaturated than that, this is warmer than this is more vibrant than that. You know, looking at the relationships between colour will help you gauge that colour and what it does within the composition. Hopefully I'll do some more lectures on colour theory soon, get a bit more in depth into all of this business. Okay, and there we have the first row with extra yellow and extra red. I'm going to jump down to the row below and start with my neutral base again, but add more red and more blue overall, and see how that affects the skin tone palette. So there's going to be less yellow in this row overall. And some of these colours that you end up with, the mixes, are just completely unexpected surprises. Well, that's part of the reason why I love doing this kind of exercise, because you find kind of colours that you would never guess in a million years would come from the combination you started with, and it really does help build your confidence with mixing colours. I remember when I first started painting, I came from a black and white illustration background. Painting, you know, was something that I came to relatively late in the game. And as a result, I didn't really have a lot of confidence with using colour. I kind of tend to default to only really looking at them in terms of value and local colour, which I think is a pretty common shorthand for most kind of young artists or young painters, or new painters, I should say. You know, we kind of have assumptions about colour. The sky is blue. Well, sometimes, yes, yeah, but not during a sunrise or a sunset, or if the sky is overcast, or depending on the environmental conditions. You know, it can be any number of colours, and the same holds true for any object. We kind of shorthand say a tree's trunk is brown, the tree leaves are green. Well, it depends on the type of tree, and it depends on the lighting. So, you know, you have to get away from those kind of preconceived notions that we have about colour. I'm doing the same thing again here now. I've got my neutral mix with extra red, extra ultramarine blue, and I'm just going to be tinting this mix with white, adding a little bit more in each time. You can see here on the right hand side of the screen, I'm just adjusting that mix on the palette with white. A little trick when you're mixing up like this on one of these stay wet palettes. It's filming this in the middle of summer. It's quite hot, quite humid, and when you're mixing with a flat brush, you know, the paint tends to flatten out, which isn't really much of an issue here because I'm only mixing this up for the sake of this demonstration. But if you were using this for a portrait, you might want to grab a palette knife and just scoop all the paint back up into a solid blob. Try not to flatten it out, and that will help keep your paint relatively moist for the duration of the painting process. You know, if it does start to dry out, then you can maybe spritz it with a water bottle, just to revive it a little bit. But obviously, the more mass the blob of paint has, the longer it will take to dry out. So you can see this tone here. You'd think it would be more purpley with red and blue in the mix, but we've still got that kind of base neutral skin tone. So we're just adjusting it with the red and blue to create some variation rather than shifting it too far in that direction. And just adjusting it with white each time. I find that the skin tones that you get when you're mixing two more of the primaries back into these skin tone bases are quite sympathetic to a lot of the skin tones that I perceive when I'm looking at faces. This is where the good stuff is, I find. Well, those first three rows are bad by any stretch of the imagination. I think the one with more red in overall perhaps is, you know, you use that fairly sparingly, maybe kind of around the tip of the nose. You know, the yellow maybe in the forehead. This skin tone I'm mixing up in this row with the red and the blue and the neutral. I think, you know, you'd see a lot of this maybe around the jawline. It tends to be a bit warmer and a bit darker around the base of the jaw. Yeah, this could be a good place to use this. I'm just kind of trying to think in terms of generalizations of where certain color shifts come to the fore in the face. So the jaw might be a very good place for this. But obviously every face is different. Just having a little faff about now, bear with me. Okay, this next row that I'm going to start painting in is going to be the neutral mix plus extra yellow and extra ultramarine blue. So with that mix in there, red is going to be a little less dominant within the skin tones that we're going to mix up now, and we're going to tackle this exactly the same way. Just tint it with white a little bit each time and shift it down towards those very, very light skin tones. I'm going to go ahead and just edit this whole chunk out. It's I'll look to see. So here we have the first skin tone. You can see that it's shifting a little bit towards green, isn't it? Well, as we add the white in, it will just tamp that down. This is what I mean about finding some very unexpected results when you see the skin tone we have at the end of this row compared to the one we start with. I'm just fixing my key with a little bit of yellow and a little swatch of blue. I'm going to add a little bit of white to that mix. Start filling in this grid. And I do encourage you to try this exercise not only with skin tones, but you know, if you're not confident in mixing colours with any medium, you know, practice. Like I said in the beginning of the video, you know, make a chart, grab some green and look at all the different things you can do with green. If you're really not sure what you can do with green, grab a colour wheel. You know, you can pick up a colour wheel for about £5 from most good art suppliers, and there's a wealth of information on colour contained on those little cardboard wheels. You can shift that one colour sideways around the colour wheel. You can add more of one primary that makes it up into it than the other. With secondary and tertiary colours, you can desaturate the colour with the colour opposite on the colour wheel. You know, the mechanics of mixing colour will become more familiar to you through doing this exercise. Just pop that down, fill these in, just adjusting with white each time. This colour that I have now, you'd never think in a million years that there was blue in there necessarily, to the naked eye. All these subtleties of colour. Okay, so there we have it, and like I said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to throw up the finished graph now so you guys can see it. Enjoy. Okay, here we have the finished grid. I've made some notes on it and tidied it up a little bit. If you want to pause this, you can obviously have this to hand on your screen and follow along with it, or you can follow along with the video. If you take a screenshot, you can do whatever you want with it. I'm gonna show you in a second an example of a self-portrait that I did with using this method of mixing skin tones, just so that you can see kind of the range of skin tones that are used in the face. You know, one of the most problematic things with portraiture usually is that the colours look a little bit flat. They don't describe the form very well. You know, we're kind of leaning back on local colour. Also want to show you how desaturated the colours I've used in the face are in relation to something that's far more vibrant and saturated. So I'm just going to throw that up now so that you guys can compare and contrast. Hope you've enjoyed this video. So here you can see, you know, the warm skin tones kind of under the eye and the cheek and in the nose, where the highlight is hitting the side of the head. You know, how desaturated it is underneath the jaw, and you can compare those colours to this very vibrant World Tree piece that I have next to it, just to compare and contrast the saturation levels of those colours. So enjoy, good luck, see you all soon.